Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Tip of the Ice-Burgh podcast, your home for Pittsburgh Penguins news and analysis. You can find us on YouTube at Tip of the Ice-Burgh. Make sure that you like, share, and subscribe, or you can catch us anywhere you get your podcast from. I'm your host, Nick Belsky, joined as always by Nick Horwat, and we have a fantastic show for you guys today. First and foremost, what has been the biggest difference for Tristan Jarry, because he has been lights out since coming back up from the American Hockey League? We'll discuss that to lead off the show. Plus, has that and Sidney Crosby's heroics brought the Pittsburgh Penguins back into the playoff race? We'll break that down midway through the show, and then we'll close things off with a look at the Pittsburgh Penguins class of free agents for the 2025 offseason. Let's get started on the Tip of the Ice-Burgh. Let's kick things off with the biggest storyline revolving around the Pittsburgh Penguins. And for the first time in seemingly forever, it's not Sidney Crosby. In fact, it's Tristan Jarry, who is 4-0 since his return from his second stint at the American Hockey League level this season. He's looking like a completely different player. But the question is, what's different about Tristan Jarry? Outside of the fact that he's winning hockey games, outside of the fact that he's simply stopping pucks, a little bit deeper, what's different? And I think it's two things: confidence and quick starts. The confidence is key, and I think that's the biggest thing here. You can feel how much more comfortable he is in net than he has been in, honestly, almost 2 seasons at this point. You can see it, and this is always in his positioning. If he's deep in his crease, if he's by the goal line, he's not feeling too confident. If he's out at the top of his crease, if he's on his angles, that's when you can tell that Tristan Jarry is feeling it, and that's the way that he's been playing over the last week and some change. But hasn't this always been the book on Tristan Jarry? If he's confident, he's good. If he lacks confidence, it's very much so in the opposite direction.
I mean, that's how the book goes for most goalies, you'd have to assume. The confidence is a big key when it comes to this position specifically. It is tough to really nail down. I mean, yeah, confidence is going to be a big piece as to why Tristan Jarry is all of a sudden, lighting the world on fire in so many words. Because I think Mike Sullivan said it last year. Sometimes when the younger players at least get their call up from the AHL, they come in like a house of fire. They're extremely hot because it's that adrenaline rush of you're getting a crack at the NHL. You're getting that rush. You're getting that run. With Jarry, it's a bit different. It's a bit more muted because he's been here before. He's a 2-time All-Star. He knows how to do this. Mm-hmm. So maybe this has some of those adrenaline effects of back in the NHL. You're getting another run at it. But at the same time, there's a realization of I'm Tristan Jarry. I'm a 2-time All-Star who, had it not been for injuries, may have carried this team deep into a playoff run once before. We know that skill was there. We don't know what happened this year. Again, goaltending is always voodoo, which is just another layer to this conversation of could just be on a hot run because Alex Nedeljkovic did it last year after the deadline. Why not this time around the Penguins backup goalie once again go on a hot run post-deadline to really make you wonder if this team is tanking or not? Mm-hmm. That being said, though, I don't really, outside of confidence, I don't really know what could have been changed, what could be driving this sort of momentum swing for him. More or less, I just have takes on it, or more or less just have thoughts on it, which are, man, just in time for me to say, he listens to the podcast just after I say, what do the Penguins have to lose? He goes up and say, we're not going to lose. So I'm not even like that upset that he's doing this. Like, good for him. It does make me wonder again, if he was here all season, what would the trade deadline have looked like? But I mean, it's a fascinating situation that proves the Penguins will never die, no matter what. They will always be entertaining. Mm-hmm. There will always be something going on.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing you mentioned there is the talent has always been there with Tristan Jarry. That's never been the issue, is that he's not talented enough. He has the talent to be a guy that has a 9-10 save percentage or better in the National Hockey League over extended periods, over entire seasons. We've seen that in the past from Tristan Jarry. So the talent has always been there. It's always the mental that's the biggest hurdle. And you mentioned it. It's the same with a lot of different goaltenders, but it seems to affect Tristan Jarry to a very high degree because, like I said, you can see it from game to game, from period to period, where his positioning is at. If he's deep in his net, then he's not feeling good that day. He's not seeing the puck well. He's on his heels that entire game. But the last 4 games, he's been out. He's been challenging pucks. He's been taking away angles. He's been very confident, or at least outwardly, he's seemed very confident in the last 4 games, and the results have followed. I mean, a .930 save percentage speaks for itself, but the second part of this entire equation that I'm looking at, and I think one feeds into the other, is quick starts. In the last 4 games, since returning from the AHL, Tristan Jarry has allowed 1 first period goal and has a .975 save percentage in the opening frame. If you look back at his first 22 games played, he gave up 24 goals in the first period. He had an .860 save percentage. So the fact that he is showing up on time and getting those saves early in the game, I think that is also building his confidence. And we all know, how many times have we watched the Pittsburgh Penguins go up against an opponent, and even though their goaltender isn't a Vezina quality goaltender, even if it's a goaltender that you've never heard of before, they get some shots on net, that goalie makes some saves, and all of a sudden he's confident, he's comfortable, and he heats up as the game goes on and makes impressive save after impressive save later in the outing. I feel like that's what we're seeing from Tristan Jarry, is he's establishing a base early, getting into the game with a couple of saves in the first couple of minutes of the game, and then he's building from there. Some of the best saves we've seen from Tristan Jarry have been in the second and third periods, but you can't get that confident level of Jarry without seeing what he's doing in the first period. Again, 1 goal allowed in the first period in the last 4 games and saving over 97% of the shots that he's faced. He has been excellent, I think, all around, but especially in the first period. I think that is a huge key for Jarry, is getting off on the right foot, and he's done that in the last week.
Yeah, it's been crazy. I mean, even outside of the first period, overall, he's getting peppered with shots. It's not like he's taking in these 18 save games. The defense is still slightly abysmal in front of him. If anything, you could argue personnel-wise, it's worse than what it was when he left. I mean, like Chris Letang, Erik Karlsson are still around, but he came back and you had Ryan Shea as the top line defenseman next to Chris Letang. Now it's the guy's name who I can't even pronounce.
Vladislav Kolyachonok.
Yeah, now it's him up there. It's this weird mishmash of defenders in front of him. P.O. Joseph isn't even healthy. Mm-hmm. That all of a sudden it seems like he's still going to be getting a ton of traffic, a ton of shots on net toward him, and yet Jarry's making all these saves.
Yeah,
maybe that's another part of it. Maybe he understands there's kind of a weaker defense. He's had time to sort of reflect, listen to the podcast, and reflect on how bad the defense is in front of him, and needs to sort of step his own game up and play with a little bit more confidence, because he knows he's going to be taking a ton of rubber. There's no chance he's going to go in and face just under 20 shots, face 20 shots, 22 shots. There's going to be a ton on him. And also, the more saves you make, the more confidence you gain. There's a lot of positives happening with Tristan Jarry returning with this 4-0 run, and somehow, some way, proving he still has what it takes, and even more somehow, some way, keeping these Penguins alive in the playoff race.
Yeah, that is 100%. I don't know about alive. We'll talk about that in a minute. But the last thing I'll say on Tristan Jarry here is, it's not like he went down to the American Hockey League, lit the world on fire, and then just brought that version up to the NHL. He struggled at the American Hockey League. He didn't get consistent playing time because the Penguins organization values playing time for guys like Philip Larson. They value playing time for guys like Sergei Murashov, and they should. Look how good those guys are playing down at the American League level. But he struggled when he was down there. That just, to me, again, points to the fact that this was a confidence and mental issue that he has, at least for the short term, been able to figure out and put together a stretch of games here that is the best we've seen of Tristan Jarry, I would say, since he signed that new contract, probably a little bit longer. Yeah,
I can see that. And you're right. It wasn't even he wasn't even red hot in the AHL. His last game there, I think he blew a 2 or 3 goal lead.
3-goal lead. Yeah. They were,
I think he's still
4-1 or something.
Yeah, I think they still won, but you still allowed that to happen. You still allowed those goals in. You allowed that game to get back within reach. I mean, like I said, whenever he was coming back up, I said, what do the Penguins have to lose? Truthfully, they didn't have much to lose, and now here they are, and we'll get into it. I think for what it's worth, they're not dead yet. They're not dead in the water. We'll see. We can discuss it.
Well, let's get to that. Now, you mentioned the playoff race. And the Pittsburgh Penguins all of a sudden have a conversation to be had, because this is the second straight year that they have picked it up following a lull in post-deadline. I don't know if it's the new blood. I don't know if it's the fact that everybody's just looking and saying, oh, we only got like 15 games left. Why not leave it all out there? Because worst comes to worst, we don't make it, we go on vacation in 15 games. If we do make it, then heck, we're playing playoff hockey, and that's what it's all about anyway. But the Penguins, no matter what the cause is, they're winners of 4 straight games. And those are 4 very solid victories. 3 of them coming against playoff teams, and 1 of them coming against the first team out, who is technically tied for the last playoff spot in the Western Conference in the St. Louis Blues. So I'll ask you this, Horwat. Are the Penguins back in your eyes in the Eastern Conference playoff race?
No, they're not back. Technically, they are still puttering around in terms of mathematically eliminated, this, that, the other. They have 13 games remaining with 66 points currently. Do the quick math there. They are 6 points behind the Rangers.
Mm-hmm.
The only reason why I would say they're still puttering around, I mean, like I said, the race is essentially over for them, but the reason why they're still in it, sort of, like the last car in the race, it's because this East is still so tight.
Yeah.
They have 2 teams below them in the running in the wild card race, and yet they're 6 points back. Like, there's a ton of teams ahead of them, but they're also all within striking distance if they continue this hot streak and 1 or 2 of those teams just kind of fumbles their bags. It's going to be an interesting run. Again, I don't think the Penguins have a chance. If anything, they're going to screw themselves out of a nice pick. But that's just been the Penguins' way the last few seasons. But yeah, no, they're not back in. They're not back, but certainly not dead yet. And normally you can never bet against Sidney Crosby and Evgeny Malkin. We'll see what these last 13 games bring. Every other team in the league, by the way, has games in hand.
Yeah.
So that's an issue. The money puck odds still have them at 0.1%.
Mm-hmm.
So there's still a chance, but it's an extreme long shot. It'll, like I said, the Penguins are never not entertaining. So there will at least be entertainment value for the next week, and then we'll see where things go from there.
Yeah, now the Pittsburgh Penguins being 6 points back, is not awful, but at the same time, it's what you mentioned there. It's that almost all have games in hand, and the ones that don't have games in hand have played the exact same amount. I think there's only 2 of them in the Eastern Conference wildcard race that have, but most of them also have multiple, right? Mm-hmm. The other thing that I'm looking at is there's 6 teams to jump. That is a lot of teams that you're hoping fall back. You mentioned, maybe 1 or 2 teams fumble the bag. You're going to need 4 or 5. Unless the Pittsburgh Penguins are about to go on a run here and win every single game a la Shoresy season 1, it's going to be tough to see 5 or 6 teams all fumble the bag at the end of the season like this. So how about I change up the parameters a little bit? How many more wins in a row? Because right now they've won 4. How long does this win streak have to go before you believe that they are actually in the conversation for the Eastern Conference playoffs?
It might take how many more? So they're at 4. Mm-hmm. It might take another 6.
It's exactly where I'm at. That gets you to the end of their March schedule. And if you look at who they play, there's a couple 4-point swings in there. The Islanders tonight, Columbus later this week, Ottawa at the end of the month. There's a couple of opportunities for 4-point swings where, no, you don't get to erase that game in hand, but you do get to make considerable ground on the teams right in front of you.
Yeah, it might take a ton. Like, they might not be halfway through a winning streak for me to go, okay, fine, you have something to cook with here. Mm-hmm. Like I said, they still have the worst goal differential in the East. Yeah. It is tough saying and discussing, like, how could they get back into it? How could they turn things around? Especially after you sell off key pieces, after you essentially say you're going into this offseason with veterans that aren't going to let the young kids come up. And, I mean, so far, again, talk about guys that listen to the show, the Connors have come up and done well. Mm-hmm. And if things work out and if things start to gain ground, again, it's extremely unlikely, but then you have entertainment value, then you have people coming to the games. Square one. Square two, getting these other teams to fall off. It's going to take a huge winning streak. If they can turn this 4-gamer into a 10, I mean, first of all, you'd have something to talk about because it's a 10-game winning streak, but also suddenly you are looking back into this conversation. You are at that point, 86 points. Who knows where everyone else is, but in good position in that race. There'll be a ton to watch for, and essentially they lose 2 more, forget it.
I mean, when you're talking about a 10-game win streak, that's not an insignificant thing.
No.
Right? That would be their longest win streak since 2021-22 season, and I don't think that illustrates enough how crazy that would be, because it would only be the 7th time in franchise history that the Penguins had won double-digit games in a row. So that's what we're talking about as far as what they need to do for us to feel like they're even in the conversation, because they could win 10 games in a row, head into April on the hottest team in the entire NHL, and they could still be 3-4 points out of a playoff spot, and everybody else still have games in hand. And you look at it and say, oh, Money Puck has them at now 25%, which, I mean, don't get me wrong. If we were sitting on April 1st and they have a 25% chance to make the playoffs, that would be a dramatic and a crazy kind of comeback to even get to that level. This team has the leaders to do it. I think this team has shown that when all things go in their favor, specifically goaltending, which we led off this show talking about, they can win hockey games. The problem is this is a 4-game sample size out of 69 games, right? The other 65 games tell us this is not a good hockey team. This is a hockey team that is deservedly so in the bottom 10 of the National Hockey League standings. So the belief of, oh, they're going to rattle off 6 more wins in a row after everybody just kind of freaking out that they've won 4 in a row, it feels unlikely to me. But that's what they would have to do for me to look at this and say, okay, maybe the door is open a little bit. It just feels like right now they need to prove it. And I think that they've put themselves in that position, as I mentioned, with the way that they played over the first 65 of this season.
Yeah. Does getting overtime points help at all? Because I'm looking at the streak from last season.
It doesn't. That's the thing. Last year, they went on a miraculous run and just fell short. And even in that run, they were 8-3-3. I think they would need to be better to close out this season to have a chance, because look at where they sit right now. They are so much further out of the pack, and there's so many other teams that they have to jump than they did last season.
And toward the end of that, it did end up being not in their hands. They had to worry about other teams to lose and all that. So there is all of those other factors. But for what it's worth, I mean, they did go on that 10-game point streak where it was slowly crawling back into things. And what really makes things unlikely is that the Penguins last season went on that 10-game point streak with 1, 2, 3, 4 of them being 3 of them being overtime losses. There was at those extra points of those 3 would have gotten them in. So the idea of losing out on points, just singular ones, could be an absolute killer. As fun as that streak was last season, you also have to figure that streak started March 24th, which has not happened yet.
Yeah.
So it was later in the year last year that they went on that run. They were also closer the entire season. They weren't coming from the very bottom.
They were sitting from a spot out, 2 spots out. I think at most 3 spots out last year. They were in dead last in the East a week ago.
Yeah. Yeah. Or at least in the Metro. I forget how bad Buffalo's been all season.
Yeah, they've been teetering with Buffalo. But that's how bad you've been. You were teetering with Buffalo for last in the East.
Yeah. So that sort of positioning they had themselves in before the streak last season also helped a ton. This time they're coming from the bottom, which makes us think they're going to need a 10-game winning streak, not point streak, a 10-game winning streak just to get in the conversation again. And then you can go into April going, you got to damn near win out.
Yeah.
So it's with, 13 games remaining. Well, good luck with that.
Yeah, it's a tough hill to climb, but again, this is the position that they've put themselves in with the way they played, honestly, most of the season, except for the stretch between November and December, from holiday to holiday, from Thanksgiving to Christmas, they were a really good team. Outside of that, they have been a really bad team, and they haven't really found a middle ground. And right now, I mean, they've been a really good team for the last week. They are going to have to extend that for another month to close out the season to be able to have a snowball's chance and where to get into the playoffs. But let's stop talking about playoffs and this season. Let's look a little bit into next season, because while it's nice to talk about the Penguins' win streak, it's nice to talk about them creating a little bit of buzz for themselves late in the season, and we will get to that throughout the week and throughout the remainder of the season. We do have to have an eye towards the offseason, because it is going to be a very important one for Kyle Dubas and the Pittsburgh Penguins. We have the official free agent class of 2025 following the NHL's trade deadline. 8 pending free agents on the active roster, 5 of them restricted, 3 of them pending unrestricted free agents. Let's do some must sign, maybe sign, and move on. A segment that we do 2 or 3 times a year, but it's always good to do it post deadline whenever you officially see that full class of players that is going to need a new contract from the Penguins entering the offseason. Let's kick things off with restricted free agents and somebody who last year Penguins had a chance to re-sign. They let him walk in free agency, and then, well, he came right back via a trade, and that is defenseman Pierre-Olivier Joseph. Horwat, what are you doing with P.O. Joseph if you are Kyle Dubas?
Man, I can never tell with P.O. Joseph. I think for the way this defense looks and the fact that P.O. Joseph is still an RFA for a couple more seasons, maybe you just bring him. Oh, look at that. Maybe, actually. Look at that. I'll go with a maybe, just because maybe you do just bring him back on those couple of years, get him to the UFA year, send him on his way then. You at least fill roster spots. You have defense coming. It's just not quite there yet. And we know P.O. Joseph is – we know what P.O. Joseph is. We know what he can do in the system and who he can play with. However, depending on what kind of options you have in free agency, that's where things might get iffy. The RFA always gets weird because you essentially have to, especially with arbitration rights, you essentially have to give them something.
No, you don't.
Right, you don't.
They didn't do it. They didn't do it with P.O. Joseph last year. They didn't extend a qualifying offer, and he walked in free agency.
Yeah, it just can get iffy. That being said, I think this one is a maybe. Maybe, I mean, send them the contract, see what happens from there. It's not going to be an expensive one again. So I don't see why not, but I could also see why not.
I'm taking a hard stance on P.O. Joseph. It is time for the Pittsburgh Penguins to cut the cord with P.O. Joseph. They brought him back out of necessity a little bit. There were some injuries, and they needed some guys on the left side. It hasn't worked. He has not played well as a member of the Penguins since returning to the organization. He's a bottom-pairing defenseman, and I don't know why he keeps getting put in. I mean, I do know why, because they have a severe lack of top left-handed defensemen, but he continuously gets played with Chris Letang, and he's just not somebody that at this stage of his career, or maybe at any stage of his career, that remains to be seen, that can handle that type of workload. So I think he is playing out of role in Pittsburgh. I think he is a bottom-pairing defenseman, and when you look at what the Penguins have there, they have plenty, right? Ryan Graves is still in the organization. Connor Timmons joined, and he hasn't been bad. We'll talk about him in a minute. Vlad Kolyachonok has been very impressive, and eventually you'd have to imagine he's going to get back down in the lineup. Ryan Shea signed to a new extension last week. So with that in mind, I think there's just too many cooks in the kitchen, plus all the young names that you mentioned that could potentially make the jump as early as next year. I'm moving on from P.O. Joseph. Speaking of depth defensemen, let's talk about the new guy, Connor Timmons, restricted free agent. What are you doing with him?
I think this is another one. You just sign him to a 1-year deal. I'm going to go with a must. Get the 1-year deal. He's gotten you good work so far. You keep it a cheap deal, and you make it movable if you need to at the deadline again next year. He makes $1.1 million now, which is higher than I would have expected. But you give him something similar for another year, another season. And if those young defensemen, like you mentioned, are ready to make that jump toward the deadline next year, also, again, depending on where the Penguins stand at the deadline next year, because they're trying to go for it again.
Maybe.
Potentially. Outwardly to the public, they're going for it again. Who knows what the inward looks like. You deal them away, depending on how things look. So I'd say just to fill roster space, because we'll get to Grzelcyk later, just to fill the roster space, and who knows what kind of trades happen this offseason as well.
Yeah, he hasn't been bad since the trade deadline. I'm not going to say must sign. I'm not going to go that far. I'll say maybe sign on Connor Timmons. I mean, he has a bit of physicality. He can battle with those other third pairing right-handed defensemen, like you mentioned. I mean, guys like Jack St. Ivany, guys like Ryan Shea who can switch sides, guys like Vlad Kolyachonok. Just having him as a kind of security blanket for the depth of the defense is not a bad thing. So if you want to bring him back, if he continues to play well over the last 13 games played, I have no problem bringing back Connor Timmons. But this is not a guy that I'd be pounding the table for. It's just another, they re-signed Ryan Shea. I was like, I guess. So if they re-signed Connor Timmons, I'd say, all right, I guess. Like, not upset about it. It's not going to move the needle a lot, but he's a third pairing defenseman. He shouldn't move the needle. In fact, you shouldn't notice him at all. And I think there have been some times during these games that you haven't. And the times that you have, for the most part, it's just him laying a body check. So that's exactly what you want out of that position. So I have no problem if the Penguins go out and bring back Connor Timmons. Now, from Connor to Connor, let's talk about Connor Dewar. I'm going to say must sign with Connor Dewar. I think he's off to a great start. Obviously, we talked yesterday about how good that third line has been with him, Blake Lizotte, and Noel Acciari since coming over. I mean, outscoring opponents 3-0. Hard to get better than that, especially when you're starting 82% of your shifts in the defensive zone. But I think this is a good bottom six piece that allows you to take your time with prospects. And we know the Penguins organization values that. Jason Spezza has been on a tour of telling every media member that will listen, whether it's Matt Vensel of the Post-Gazette, whether it is the guys on Sportsnet Pittsburgh on the broadcast, that he values and the team values being able to be patient with their prospects. Connor Dewar gives them a chance to do that because I think he's a solid bottom sixer that can come in next year. And similar to Connor Timmons, if somebody jumps him and somebody earns the right to have his roster spot, okay, throw him on waivers, trade him. It's not that difficult to move a Connor Dewar. But at the end of the day, if they're not ready, I think Dewar is a perfectly fine placeholder and a perfectly fine player in the Penguins bottom six. So I'm saying you bring back Connor Dewar.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I completely agree. He can fill the space for now and can stay up if need be. And he fits the Kyle Dubas mold perfectly. Aside from being a former Leaf, he is a bit more of a reclamation project, but not quite. It's in that mold of the Philip Tomasino, of the Cody Glass when they had him, of the Anthony Beauvillier when they had him. Just that sort of mold of younger player, middling, and can fill roster spots and can produce when need be.
To me, I think he's less so a Tomasino Glass mold, more so just he is what he is.
Yeah.
Like he's a guy that's going to play fourth line minutes, maybe third line minutes if you have what the Penguins have right now, which is essentially two bottom six lines that don't really fit the mold of either third or fourth exactly. And I think that there's value in knowing what you're going to get out of a player. And I think they know what they're going to get out of Connor Dewar. Let's go to somebody that we talked about a lot last year in the 3M segment. Emil Bemstrom had a great season so far at the American Hockey League level, has had a handful of games now at the NHL level to see what he has at this one. What are you doing with Emil Bemstrom?
I can't believe he's still an RFA. I feel like he's been in this league forever.
Yes.
Maybe just because I would say you're going to roll him in the same way you did this year. You're gonna probably start him in the AHL, call him up after he's lights out, and then just for roster replacement or for injury replacement. Yeah, it's a maybe because you're going to use him in the same role again. He doesn't move the needle when he's in the lineup, in the NHL lineup. He did fairly well last year, so maybe that extra jump adds to something. And if you need the depth piece, you have one. It's just a maybe. Nothing too earth-shattering here.
Emil Bemstrom is the perfect illustration of the way this organization has changed how its fan base looks at players. Because last year, I said there is no need whatsoever to bring back Emil Bemstrom. I was actually slightly upset in the offseason when it said that they signed him to a one-year deal. I said, why? What did he show you? Because last year, they said, the AHL is important to us, but they hadn't really shown us yet. Now that they have shown us how important the AHL is going to be to the master plan that Kyle Dubas has, I think Emil Bemstrom fits in with that. And I think it's exactly what you mentioned. If you still need vets at the AHL level, it's hard to get better than Emil Bemstrom. He has been very good at that level. He was an all-star at that level this year. Once he gets surpassed by the young guns like he did this year, he'll come up and play mop-up duty in the NHL until they're ready to pass him up again, right? how much, as Jason Spezza said, it's been great because at the beginning of the season, we got the young guys in, we got them experience, and now they're taking on larger roles. Rutger McGroarty is leading the team in ice time. He wasn't doing that at the beginning of the season. You needed a guy like Bemstrom to do that. Now, McGroarty has taken over. There's no room for Bemstrom at the AHL. The NHL team is post-deadline just looking for players to play, and there goes Beamer. Go ahead, mop up duty, get your chance, show us something at the NHL level. I haven't seen much that warrants him coming over and being a part of the NHL plans next year, but I think that's a good guy to have in the organization. So I'll have it at maybe sign. You can always go out and find a different veteran at the AHL level. Teams always exchange guys that are in those slots countlessly. I mean, how many times has Vinny Hinostroza found a new home? How many times has Radim Zahorna found a new home? It's guys like that I think Bemstrom fits in the mold of. So I'll say maybe sign with him. Last RFA on the list here. Horwat, the more I see, the more I like out of this player. So I think I'm going to immediately say, you must re-sign Philip Tomasino. What are your thoughts?
And I'm in full agreement as well. Philip Tomasino is someone, because he's really young at only 23, can play center, at least as listed on Puckpedia here. Has those chances to really be something with this team going forward. I don't know what kind of deal you sign him to. Again, it probably doesn't need to be long or expensive, but the more he plays, the better he looks. He's currently playing with Evgeny Malkin. I get that Malkin's line mates have kind of been in hell all season, but it's a good player to keep around for the future. I like what he can bring. I like what he has done for this team so far, and it'll be an enjoyable piece to have moving forward as well.
Yeah, the last couple of weeks, even when he's not on the score sheet, which he's found the score sheet with a little bit more regularity than he did earlier in the season when he first came to the Penguins. He was kind of red hot. Then there was a little bit of a lull, and he was trying to find his game, and he's kind of found it here. And it's not just in the offensive zone. I've noticed on countless occasions, he's back in the defensive zone. His positioning is very good. He's good at winning puck battles, and his chemistry with Malkin, like you mentioned, is something that we're starting to see grow and potentially could iron him out a position in the top 6 to start next season, which is something I don't think a lot of people expected. But he's starting to find his game offensively. He's looking much better on the power play. He looked a little lost when he first came over the Penguins on the power play. Some of that might have been learning the scheme. Some of that might have just been in general development from then to now. Because if you look at him on the power play, very crisp movements, very crisp passes, very good decision-making with the puck on his stick. So I've really enjoyed watching the growth of Phil Tomasino this season. I think if you're trying to look at some of the biggest success stories of the Pittsburgh Penguins throughout the season, Tomasino has to be at or near the very top of that list. And I think that's something that you have to build upon. And I'd have a hard time believing Tomasino wouldn't want to come back to the organization that has given him this opportunity and that he's flourished in, because you look at what he's done, 10 goals in about 41 games. It's a 20-goal pace. That's a very good pace for a guy that came over in a cap dump deal, essentially, for the Nashville Predators. It's just another instance this year of Kyle Dubas taking Barry Trotz to the woodshed. And I think the Penguins got a very good player out of it in Philip Tomasino.
Totally agree with you. That's all. I'm in agreement. It's an easy one.
Let's go to UFAs now. Let's start with Boko Imama, somebody who at the beginning of the season, I think a lot of Penguins fans were unaware of. Even when they signed him, a lot of Penguins fans were like, oh, okay, like don't know much about him. And I think he's opened a lot of eyes. I'm going to say maybe you sign Boko Imama for similar reasons to Emil Bemstrom, but I think he gives more of an impact at the NHL level. I like what he's brought to this team at the top level. I like having that guy who's a willing checker in the lineup. Yeah, Noel Acciari enjoys body checking. Noel Acciari likes physicality of any kind, whether it is him hitting somebody hitting him, or the puck hitting his face. That seems to be the 3 stages of Noel Acciari's season. But Boko Imama is somebody that's going to go out there to change the tone. And I've really liked what I've seen out of him. And if they bring him back to be a depth piece, an extra forward, I wouldn't dislike it. I think he's somebody who has opened my eyes this season as to what his potential is in this league.
Mm-hmm. I'm with all those, except that pushes me to a must. No one else on this team really can drive play with that sort of intensity. Like you said, Noel Acciari does enjoy it. Yeah, but how often do you see Noel Acciari drop the gloves? I know we haven't seen it from Boko Imama yet, but
but that's it.
But you know that willingness is there. You know that's a big portion of his game. It's along the lines of I can't think of it. Of like an old school enforcer. It's along the lines of the Ryan Reeveses of the world. That's really why he's here. Let's be honest with ourselves. That sort of situation. But he drives a lot whenever he's here. I enjoyed what he's brought so far. He's, like I said, one of the only Penguins willing to really go to town with an opponent like that. Again, like Achari does it. Some other guys are willing to throw the body and lay hits, but no one at the level of Boko Imama. And again, if we're using him as an extra forward, that's fine. I mean, he's barely playing when he's in the lineup anyway.
Yeah, I'd like to see those numbers come up a little bit too.
Yeah, and I've always felt that. But for what it's worth, maybe next season brings something a little different. Maybe he adds a little something here, a little something there. I think he's better than Matt Rempe. I'll say that.
He's better than Matt Rempe. He's better than Ryan Reeves, who you mentioned. He's like, listen, if he is that enforcer for the Penguins, if that is how they see him, he's still somebody that I think plays the game.
Yeah.
Right. Matt Rempe doesn't really play the game. Ryan Reeves does. He wouldn't last in this league as long as he has if he didn't. Yeah. But I think Imama is better equipped. I think he has better talent when it comes to actually playing the game of hockey. So I don't think I wouldn't just put him in the box of an enforcer. I think that he's a guy that he's not going to provide 10 goals a season, but I think he's a guy that can maintain play when he's out there on the ice.
Absolutely. And that's why I enjoy what he's brought. Use him as the extra forward. He's the Ryan Reeves type, except he's way younger than Ryan Reeves and is going to make a much more affordable contract. And boy, when it comes to Matt Rempe, the Rangers just like shoving him down everyone's throats.
Yeah, we don't need to continue to talk about the Rempire State Building. He's a fun t-shirt design. He was an interesting, not Anthony Lynn. What is it? Jeremy Lynn?
Yes.
Yeah, the Lynn Sanity. That was last year. This year, you notice that it's kind of faded into the back. The novelty act has kind of worn off with Matt Rempe. But let's go from Matt Rempe to Matt Nieto. This one might be quick. I'm moving on from Matt Nieto.
Yep, that was easy. Moving on.
All right, that was very easy. And let's finish it off with another Matt, actually. Matt Grzelcyk. This is an interesting conversation. Horwat, I will let you lead off with this one.
It is an interesting conversation, but I think my answer came pretty easily, and that is you move on. He came in, he worked his services, and he was, I don't know about almost traded at the deadline, but there's a lot of that conversation happening from us and others. It's just not someone that you're overly worried about coming back for another season. I get why people might. However, not that you've created a logjam in defense here, but this is a spot that can open up for maybe some adding through a trade, adding through free agency. There are other options here, I think. That's just me. When it comes to the way this team is looking, he isn't going to be part of that sort of future.
Horwat, I couldn't disagree more. I couldn't. I look at the Pittsburgh Penguins, and somebody has also highlighted, I say the full name a lot because I like the alliteration. Okay, back off. I look at this team, and I say they already need a new top four left-handed defenseman to fill the role of Marcus Pettersson. It's not going to be Ryan Graves. Is not going to be Vlad Kolyachonok. Not for an entire season. They're not going to have him as the answer. I like what he's done, but he's not going to be the answer there. So the Penguins already need to fill the role of Marcus Pettersson. They might need to fill another top four role if they trade Erik Karlsson. Let's not act like that's not looming over the Penguins as well. So if you're telling me that they're going to go into this summer, they're going to trade Karlsson, and they're going to say 3 of our top 4 defensemen from last year are off of this roster. The only one remaining is Chris Letang. That feels like a team that is still moving in the direction of burn it down as much as we can. Not to the ground, not to the studs, because as we've heard, you don't do that with Crosby and Malkin. That's not part of the plan. They're not going to burn it to the studs, which is why it feels to me that they're going to bring back Matt Grzelcyk. He's been very good. And you cannot take this away. It's not just an asterisk. It is a very important piece to the entire equation. He has been very good on the power play. And he's been better on defense as the year has gone on. I wouldn't go as far as to say he's great defensively, but he has done something that in 2 years, no other defenseman not named Marcus Pettersson has been able to do. And that is perform at a consistently decent level in your own zone when playing next to Erik Karlsson. I think that has to be taken into account as well. So imagine him with somebody who can actually play defense above a third grade level. Like Erik Karlsson, I don't like to bash on him too much because I do think that he gets it too much from the fan base. But defense-wise, there's a lot to be desired with Erik Karlsson's game. If Matt Grzelcyk is playing with somebody who is a defense first or even a defense 50-50 type of player, I think you see better in his own zone out of Matt Grzelcyk. And we've seen a lot of good in the offensive zone from him on the power play, no less, which, yeah, you can say, well, Marcus Pettersson had a career year offensively playing next to Erik Karlsson. It's just what Karlsson does. But considering the fact that Matt Grzelcyk has been a power play merchant this year too, that credit doesn't come from Karlsson. Grzelcyk doesn't share the ice with Karlsson on the power play. So he's a power play general. He's been better defensively. And the Penguins need to already fill one, maybe two spots outside of Grzelcyk's on the defensive side of the ice. That's why I'm saying he is a must sign for the Penguins.
And I get it. Like I said, I understand all the angles to it. I just think of when he was signed, how everyone was not on board with it. And
I was too.
Yep. And I get that he's had the season to sort of prove himself. However, you go into next season, you can't forget the way everyone felt going into this season. You just can't. It's kind of the way we looked at Brandon Tanev for a long time. In every year's a new year with this contract. Yeah. Again, this is a different situation. It would be every year's a new year with this player. Can he continue what he's done? There's no guarantee that he can. Marcus Pettersson had a hell of a season last year. Took a step back. I mean, he was still good, still solid this year, still managed to be a great trade piece for the Penguins, but it wasn't as fruitful as last season. And every year, players change pretty much every season in terms of, are they getting better? Are they getting worse? I get that Ryan Graves might still be anchored around, so maybe you're trying to keep a spot away from him somehow. Really, I think I could go either way with Matt Grzelcyk. I just feel that there are other upsides to be had somewhere else. Plus, the way this team is going, the way you said, like, if they're losing three of their top four defensemen, then it looks like a team that's still very much going in by way of rebuild. Like I said, outwardly facing, they're still going for it. Inwardly, hard to tell, but probably still rebuilding. So.
Yes, but I just look at this and I say they're not going to subtract three from their top four if it's the same team that held on to Rickard Rakell, if it's the same team that held on to Erik Karlsson. Like, these are things to tell me they are not tearing this down to the studs. They still value having players that can help the team win now in the organization. And I'm not saying you sign Matt Grzelcyk to a big contract. Right. I'm not saying you sign him to 3 years. I think 2 years would be max. And even then I'm like, all right, well, you better help us out on the money here because again, can he maintain that? Who knows? But the difference between when they signed him last year and everybody said, yeah, it's a 1 year deal, whatever, and you can flip him at the deadline if he's good. And next year is the things around him have changed. Pettersson is gone. It's not, hey, Marcus Pettersson might be traded. He might be the biggest trade piece. Marcus Pettersson is gone. He's not coming back. He's already wearing an A on his sweater in Vancouver. He's gone. Erik Karlsson might be gone as well. Yeah. Do I like Owen Pickering? 100%. Is Owen Pickering ready to be Chris Letang's partner game 1 of 2025? I'm not sure about that. So if that's the case, I think as of right now, you have one player in your organization who is a bona fide top 4 defenseman or can be over an entire season. You don't get rid of that, right? On the left side, you don't get rid of that. So yeah, you can make the argument either way. And that's why we led this segment off saying this is an interesting conversation, but I think you hold on to Matt Grzelcyk. I think he's not going to be uber expensive. And I think he fills a hole that if you're going to get rid of 2 others, or if you're going to get rid of Karlsson, it's going to be hard enough filling 2 holes at the top of your defense. Why make a third whenever you have an answer right there? It might not be the answer, right? He's not the answer. He's not your future at second pairing left defense, but he's a guy that for the time being, while this team is trying to play the middle on the ice while rebuilding off of it, I think he helps you play the middle on the ice because of how good he is on the power play and because of the fact that he's been able to kind of tread water defensively next to Erik Karlsson.
Mm-hmm. I mean, this is also a conversation to rehash if we get contract details of what he's looking for, of what kind of deal he wants to get.
100%.
As of right now, Yeah, like I said, this is a conversation to rehash once those kind of details get squeaked out. But as of right now, it looks like a very interesting conversation to be had, though. Without that sort of information, without that sort of hindsight, you're looking at it as here's what he's done this year on this deal. Here's what we think he should be asking for, or here's what we think the Penguins should max out at with him.
Yeah.
And it's not much. Like you said, 2 years, about the same money. Salary cap's going way up, so maybe a touch higher.
Maybe, yeah. Give him throw him a little bone there.
And do not slap a clause on that.
Yeah, do not. Enough with the clauses. No matter what happens, enough with the clauses. Kyle Dubas.
Make that a movable deal.
But that's going to do it for this one. Like I said, there's 8 players that are going to be free agents that are on the active roster right now. Let us know in the comments section. What are you doing with these 8? P.O. Joseph, Connor Timmons, Connor Dewar, Emil Bemstrom, Phil Tomasino, Boko Imama, Matt Nieto, and Matt Grzelcyk. Let us know in the comments section. Must sign, maybe sign, and move on for those 8. But that's going to do it for this episode of The Tip of the Ice-Burgh. Thank you guys so much for tuning into this one. Remember, you can find us on YouTube at Tip of the Ice-Burgh. Make sure that you like, share, and subscribe if you enjoy our content, or you can catch us anywhere you get your podcast from. We'll see you guys next time.